Hello everyone. This is the story of what if Naruto falls into Tsunade's unspoken desires. In the Konoha village, Sakura stared calmly at the Junin and the fellow members of the Anbu. They had summoned her to take care of a problem. Apparently a dangerous one that they couldn't handle by themselves. After Sasuke left a few years ago, she had given up her long-time crush on him and focused on her training. She had been fascinated by the hunter nins whose path would sometimes cross with hers. Sakura had known that if there was anything in the world she'd even consider doing, it would becoming a hunter nin. She tapped her fingers impatiently before asking in a deceptively contained voice, "What seems to be the matter here? I've received very specific instructions from you to desert my last mission." The Anbu remained silent. Apparently they were having a hard time trying to find their tongues. Kakashi was the first to recover. However, while his voice was its normal casual tone, his eyes looked upon her with pity and pain. "Sakura, we have a very important mission for you," he announced slowly, almost reluctantly. "The Anbu has been searching for him for years, and there's no one seen hair or hide of him." Sakura's face was one of cool professional interest. She tilted her eyebrows questioningly. "Go on," she urged politely when she noticed Kakashi's hesitant expression. She leaned back against her leather chair, all the while maintaining eye contact. "This man," Kakashi took a few shallow breaths before continuing, "has committed too many felonies. His head is wanted in all 5 of the countries." She nodded, her emerald eyes flaring with interest. "What crimes has he committed?" When she noticed the tension in the room, she added, "His latest one." The Anbu winced in fear and anticipation. Sakura had been gone from Konoha for many years. She had accomplished her dream of becoming one of the best hunter nins in history. She was now even stronger than Kakashi and the rest of the Anbu put together. Her skill with chakra and weapons were well known everywhere. An old man slowly pushed himself out of his chair and faced her. Sakura stared at him in disbelief while her mouth opened and closed like a dead fish. The man was the Hokage. He had aged so much from the last time she'd seen him. He held up his hand ordering silence, which everyone instantly obliged. "You really want to know what he did?" he said, not bothering to turn around to face Sakura. "Yes," she answered confidently, although inside she felt her stomach churn nervously. In order to complete a mission, a ninja has to know their opponent inside and out. Has to know all their secrets, all their thoughts. Sakura flashed her first smile when she saw the Hokage's disconcerted look. "After all, that's what you would always say to our team." The silence deepened. The Hokage stared at the ground while he tried to organize his thoughts. Whether she knew it or not, Sakura was still deeply connected with her old teammates and friends. Whenever she visited the Konoha village, she would always stop by and spend a few hours at the ramen shop with Naruto and the rest of her friends. But she'd been busy the last few years. Apparently something was wrong. The sound ninjas were appearing everywhere. They weren't in hiding anymore. They were up to something. The Hokage took a deep breath before beginning. "This man destroyed something very precious to someone. Someone that I once knew." He paused to stare straight into Sakura's eyes. "He murdered them. In the most brutal way possible." Sakura felt a chill creep up her spine. However, she remained passive. "What did he do?" she asked cautiously, unaware that she was clasping her hands tightly together. "He killed a child. And a mother," he whispered solemnly, his frown deepening. "Their bodies were so disfigured. It was almost impossible to identify them. It was so..." The Hokage shuddered with fear and disgust. "So cruel." The woman's name was Carrie and it was her 25th birthday. Her husband went to town to buy her a birthday present. However, when he came back, he swallowed the bile that clogged his throat. He saw his wife all cut up. Her arms and feet were gone. She lay lying against the house, holding a tiny bundle. Their child. The man went forward, hoping that somehow his child had survived. Somehow. The bundle was covered in blood. The skin had been ripped off the baby and the eyes. Its eyes were lying on the ground, said the Hokage, trying to get the words through his mouth. The girl. The mother didn't have an ounce of blood left in her. Instead, the cuts on her body bled cooking oils. For the first time since he began, the Hokage turned towards Sakura with a sickened expression on his face. He cooked them alive. Sakura couldn't contain her shudder. They were right. That man was dangerous. So cruel. She felt her eyes moist with tears. while her fist slammed down upon the desk. That women didn't deserve it. She was too young. Sakura worked hard to keep her stomach down. And the boy, the child, didn't do anything. Was innocent. But now, wouldn't have a chance at life. A chance to test his wits and ability in the world. To die so young. Sakura. I want you to promise me something, said the Hokage, studying her carefully. When Sakura nodded reluctantly, he began. I want you to promise that you won't hold back. That you'd give the man everything he deserves. That you won't let your emotions get in the way, he said gently. Kakashi turned away as if he knew something that she didn't. Sakura shot him a puzzled glance that he naturally ignored. Of course I'd destroy him, she said slowly, after all he's done. Death would be too kind. Do you promise? The Hokage persisted relentlessly, his voice trembling slightly. He needs to be eliminated. And you're the only one strong enough, he said almost pleadingly. I'm not strong enough anymore. I'm old. Sakura sighed lightly before replying. I promise, she said slowly when she saw Kakashi bow his head in sadness and pain. For some reason, she had a feeling that it wasn't the answer that Kakashi was looking for. What's that man's name? She blurted out suddenly, causing everyone in the room to jump in surprise. It would be easier to track him down if I knew his name. The Anbu exchanged nervous and pitiful glances before Kakashi stepped forward. I'll tell you, he muttered slowly. It seemed like as if he'd aged rapidly. His eyes were tired. The man you're looking for. Sakura shot him a worried glance before urging him on. Something was wrong. Everyone was too nervous. They were hiding something from her. Something dreadfully important. Something that would affect the course of her life. Would break her heart. Or mend it. He had many names, but you know him as. Kakashi paused, trying to keep the tears from trickling down his cheek. For the first time in her life, Sakura stared at him, looking shocked. She had never seen Kakashi brought to tears. Something was dreadfully wrong. His name, he choked out softly, staring at the ground in shame. His name was Sasuke. Meanwhile, in a forest near the Sound Village, Sasuke spat out blood while he glared at his teammates with hatred. A few years ago he had left the safety of the Konoha village in search of Orochimaru. In search of power. A bitter smile tugged on his lips. There's always a price. Except he had no idea it was so high. When he'd lived in Konoha, he had never once appreciated anything or anyone. He had been too bent on destroying Itachi. Obsessed. Sasuke had taken everyone for granted. After all, he was the #1 rookie. Although he'd never admitted to anyone, he missed them. All of them. Naruto, Kakashi, and Sakura. The only people that had actually accepted him. The only ones he'd ever cared about. He had willingly relinquished his soul to the devil. Now he was nothing. Nothing. Sasuke bowed his head in regret, his dark bangs framing his face. If only he hadn't been so foolish. If he'd only considered what he was doing. Sasuke felt his fingers slowly curl into fists. He'd always been thirsting for power, ever since Itachi. His eyes darkened slightly. For once he couldn't blame Itachi. This time it was his own misdoing, his own fault. He could have just stayed in the village where he was welcomed, where there was love. A lopsided smile twisted across his face, causing his teammates to flinch in fear. The one that he had before he rode the killing edge. When it would be almost suicide to confront him. Even Orochimaru would take into consideration the bloodlust that flashed with an almost savage light in his eyes. The air around him began to cool. Then freeze. His teammates backed away cautiously, their eyes betraying their panic. Many have danced with him, but none have survived. A beautiful, intricate dance for survival. A deadly dance between life and death. Sasuke bared his teeth into a feral smirk. He knew how to play. He was an expert. Over the years, Sasuke had gained the reputation as the seducer. The executioner. Oh. He had done his share of murders and crime. He had no choice but to stay. No choice. There was no one to trust. No one. Sasuke had matured quite drastically. His dark, disheveled hair was messy like usual, while his dark onyx eyes shone with an intensity. A cruel light. His beautiful, aristocratic face was a smooth and cold mask. No one had ever been able to read his emotions. He kept them tightly concealed within himself. After all, emotions were weakness. They would be a hindrance to him. However, if you look deeply into his eyes, you'll see a flicker of sadness and regret. An eerie howl shattered the silence. A gentle yet cruel sound. He felt himself shudder when he realized it was coming from deep inside of him. The devil inside of him was screaming. Attacking. Trying to get free. I don't mean there's literally a demon inside of him. Just an expression. He felt the seal. Orochimaru's curse seal begin to pump then flare furiously. Sasuke held onto a mental picture of Sakura while he clung on desperately. Trying to fight it off. Trying to stay free. Part of him welcomed the power that the curse seal provided. The other side was disgusted. He was wanted to destroy his brother in a fair fight. Most of all to accomplish it himself. But the power that flowed in his veins, was strong and addictive. It was like a sweet wine that enticed its drinker. The blood-red seals spread slowly across his face while he tried to fight off the desire. The need. The wind screamed at his teammates telling them to run. To escape. Which they did. After throwing Sasuke a panicked glance. They knew they'd pushed him too far. There were times they forgot the true power that lay beneath the skin. And they knew that they were going to pay, with their lives. He knew that he was a match worthy of Orochimaru. Sasuke was strong enough physically and mentally to injure him. But was he strong enough to kill? To destroy? Until then he knew that he would have to lick Orochimaru's shoes. And be a good boy. Until the days comes. The day of redemption. He fell to his knees blinded by the pain. Eventually he would give in. Eventually. He was an avenger. And he would do whatever it took. Whatever sacrifices had to be made. Sasuke's eyes glowed with power. The power of the Sharingan, the ability to copy, to destroy. The last indication of his heritage, his village. He was the last of the Uchiha clan, the last loyal member. The though of Itachi made his blood boil, to an unbearable temperature. He opened his arms to the power, as the seal spread over his body. His chakra exploding around him, causing the trees to burn to crisp. For a moment all that could be seen was a cloud of dust as silence filled the air. The air was filled with tension. And a hatred that penetrated. Saturated through the air. When the dust lifted. All that could be seen was a pair of blood-red Sharingan eyes before it disappeared altogether. That night the wolves feasted upon human flesh. The flesh of the sound ninjas. The blood-red eyes flared one last time before fading silently into the darkness. His name, he choked out softly, staring at the ground in shame. His name was Sasuke. Sakura's eyes widened slightly with shock. She studied the Hokage for a few minutes before shaking her head in disbelief. It's not possible, she whispered softly. I know Sasuke. He wouldn't ever hurt the innocent. Especially a child. Sakura. Have we ever lied to you before? Asked Kakashi weakly. It's the truth. Even though I have a hard time believing it myself. But it's the truth. She went on as if she hadn't heard a word. He my friend. My teammate, she said slowly, trying to decipher something. Sakura ground her teeth in frustration. You must have mistaken something. She hissed, losing her cool. I've known Sasuke ever since we were kids. He has always protected and helped others. Never once. Never. Have I seen him take advantage of anything, or anyone, she muttered, crossing her arms defiantly. What makes you think it's Sasuke? You don't have any proof, save only that man's word. What makes you think you should trust him? The Hokage suppressed an urge to snarl in fury. You're right. Words can lie. But blood doesn't, he grumbled, and it was more than just that one man's confession. There have been many incidents throughout the 5 countries. And all the evidence, all the accusations point towards Sasuke. The anger that had been steadily boiling through her veins burst. How could you of all people accuse him? She shrieked, losing every ounce of self-control she had. He was your student. The #1 rookie of our year. He's done so much for our village, and this is how you repay him. Look, Sasuke might be your friend, but he was my pupil, replied Kakashi, trying to thaw out her anger. I want him alive as much as you do, he said stiffly. But, most importantly, you have to follow orders. Don't forget about your friends in the village, exclaimed Kakashi. Don't you want to protect them? It's essential to protect and cherish the ones you love. No matter the cost. It is the way of the ninja. I suppose you're right, she said reluctantly. But how could he do such a cruel thing? It's not like him. Sakura stared at the ground with a torn expression on her face. But as you said, the proof, blood doesn't lie. So Sakura, what's your choice? Where does your loyalty lie? Added the Hokage, tapping his temple impatiently. Think carefully. Your future is in your own hands. If you join him, or help him in any way whatsoever, you know what the consequences are, he said slowly. Sakura nodded absently, and replied almost automatically, if I break a law I'll be declared rogue and kicked out of the village. I'll be a missing nin. The punishment is death. She closed her eyes in pain. So what you're saying is that only one of us could remain among the living? She whispered. Sakura lifted her hand to her heart when she felt a pain of agony and sorrow. We wouldn't have hired you unless we were absolutely certain, replied the Hokage gently. We know that this would be hard for you. But we really don't have any other choice. Think about your friends, Sakura. What do you think will happen to them if Sasuke gets them? Kakashi saw the stricken look in Sakura's eyes. He sighed reluctantly before turning towards the Hokage. I propose we find another alternative, he said slowly, fully aware of the glare that Hokage sent his way. That we find another hunter nin to search for Sasuke. It's too cruel to ask so much from Sakura. An angry glint flashed across the Hokage's eyes. You know there isn't another alternative. Sakura is the only one with enough skill and power to destroy him altogether. Plus she has an advantage over him, one that no one else has. And what is that? A slow malevolent smile twisted its way onto the Hokage's lips. She knows him better than anyone else. He might even have a soft spot for her. You're going to use their friendship against him? Questioned Kakashi, his eyes dead serious. Do you have any idea how much that would hurt them? Both of them? The Hokage waved his hand dismissively. It matters not. As long as he's destroyed. His eyes pinned Kakashi to the ground. Sometimes Kakashi. I have doubts where your loyalty lies. You've been only trouble even since Sasuke showed his true face. Forgive me, Hokage-san, muttered Kakashi after another moment of silence. If I may take my leave. The Hokage quickly gave his consent. When he reached the door he stopped and announced loudly, Sakura. I'll give you another piece of advice. Follow your heart. If you do, you'll have no regrets. Sakura nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind, sensei, she whispered softly. So what is your choice? Are you going to help or not? Sakura took a deep breath and hid her emotions beneath her usual mask. Very well, Hokage-san, I have decided that I will fulfill this mission at the risk of my life. Nothing will stop me. I assure you, I won't fail. Good. Don't forget the consequences, Sakura, he warned, don't forget. Sakura bowed respectfully before disappearing into thin air. Hidden truth. Sasuke sighed dramatically while he dipped his hands into the running stream. He watched the blood slowly flow off his hands, swirling slowly through the water. The blood of his enemies. The ones that had foolishly provoked his anger. The ones that were lying dead upon the forest floor. He would have done anything to somehow be able to control the curse seal. Once it was activated, his darker side would emerge and dominate his mind and body. After all these years of torturous training, sure he had improved so much physically, but he still wasn't sure if he was strong enough to defeat Itachi. What would he do after he defeated Itachi? He had been declared rogue and had been banished from his village. And every village in the world. Sasuke glared fiercely down at the ground. Was it worth it? Giving up so much just for revenge? To be shunned by all his loved ones? To be hated and feared by all? He shook his head decisively. There was no point trying to envision his future. To hope that he would ever see his friends again. To once again be accepted as one of them. Sasuke closed his eyes in pain, while a vision of Sakura and Naruto teased at his mind. Would they hate him forever? Or would they forgive him? He roughly scrubbed his hands together, trying to rid himself of the stench of blood. After all, they've known each other since they were kids. And they were teammates. Evermore. They had been friends. He stopped suddenly while he lowered his hands in defeat. Or were they? I've been so cold and cruel to them since the day I've met them. Never showing or displaying a sign of emotion. I hid everything from them. My identity. My obsession. My feelings. More importantly, what would Sakura think of him? She had been chasing after him for years. Would she still want him? After she sees the monster that he's become? Sasuke shook his head violently. He was going crazy. Why else would he give a damn about whether Sakura still had feelings for him? He had been living alone these past few years, and it felt so strange. Sasuke's lips curled slightly at the ironic situation. When he had lived in the Konoha village, he would always push others away, desperate for some sort of privacy and space. But now, he hated it. Hated being alone. Although he'd never admit it. He was lonely and he needed some human companionship. Everyone in the Sound Village had a dream, an evil dream. Some wanted to become stronger, so they could kill others mercilessly. In a way, he detested being here. Like the other ninjas here, Sasuke was also power hunger, but for different reason. He needed to avenge his family and clan by defeat his brother Itachi. There was no honor here, and only the strongest could survive. Sasuke stared towards the waning moon. The sun would be rising soon, and it would be best to return to the village. He had become a creature of the night. When the sun was down, his power was stronger than ever. He belonged there. Creeping through the shadows in the dead of the night. It was a part of who he was. Cruel and relentless. He paused for a second. There would be a ball tomorrow night at the Konoha village to celebrate the arrival of the full moon. A slow smirk played upon his lips. A masked ball. No one would be able to recognize him. No one. His eyes lit up with joy. He would be able to see everyone again. Maybe even talk with them. Sasuke slowly turned and trudged back towards his village. Tomorrow night. He had a mission to accomplish. To enter the Konoha ball without getting caught. He increased his speed. After all, he was one of the strongest in the country. Besides, the Hokage was an old geezer by now. How much strength did he have left? That left no one in his path. No one with the power to stop him. He was the strongest in Konoha. Wasn't he? Sakura just sat there cradling her knees against her chest. Had she made the right choice? Or was she going overboard? Sasuke hadn't even arrived in Konoha since the day he left. What were the chances that he would come back? Even more. Slaughter them all. She sighed while she stared blankly out her window. No matter what he's done, she didn't have the heart to kill him. Although she knew it was her job to find and destroy missing nins. But it was so hard when she knew them. Throughout the past few years she had spilled more blood than in the history of Konoha. It was time for her to move on. Sasuke was an enemy, and she had her orders. She wouldn't fail. More importantly, she wouldn't allow her feelings to get in the way. She smiled bitterly. It was a battle of life and death, and she couldn't afford even hesitating for a moment. Sakura tensed and turned around slowly when she heard a soft rap at the door. "Who is it?" she whispered weakly. She was afraid that it was going to be Sasuke. And she would have to destroy him. Her and now. Sure, she would defeat and kill him, but not tonight, not anytime soon. "It's us," chirped Hinata and Ino together, before bounding through the door. Let's just say that Hinata isn't as shy as before, and Ino and Sakura have forgiven each other. "What's the matter?" questioned Ino when Sakura didn't respond. She exchanged a nervous glance with Hinata. Sometimes when Sakura returned to Konoha she was different. They all knew how she hated killing, and how her guilt could eating her alive. Since they were best friends, she would always try her best to cheer up Sakura. Hinata went into the bedroom and pulled out a warm blanket. "Here," she offered, handing it towards Sakura. Hinata sighed when Sakura didn't even move a muscle. So she wrapped the blanket tightly around Sakura. They all sat down next to her and offered words of condolences. "Come on. You could tell us," coaxed Ino. "It can't be that bad. Can it?" she asked when she saw Sakura's stricken expression. Sakura turned towards them, her eyes devoid of any emotion. "The Hokage assigned a mission for me." She paused slightly, taking into account Hinata and Ino's curious expressions. "What's the mission?" She took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been ordered to kill a young man. Around our age," she said quietly. "This man had committed many atrocities. And his head is wanted to all 5 of the countries." Hinata shot her a questioningly look. "Isn't it a good thing to destroy him? After all, it's amazing that all 5 countries want his head," she said timidly. Ino jumped in before Hinata could finish her thought. "You've never had trouble with destroying any of the other missing nin," she stated calmly. "What makes this one so special?" she demanded, watching Sakura carefully. He's a murderer. And he deserves to die. A very painful death, she said cruelly. Sakura winced at those words. You don't understand, she replied, running her hands slowly through her hair. This one's different than the rest, she said hesitantly. Ino. Hinata. I want you to answer something for me. Tell me the truth. Okay, Ino muttered nervously. Sakura was acting too serious. She was acting like as if it was a life or death situation. The only other time she had seen this side of her was when she was protecting Naruto and Sasuke from the sound ninjas. Sure, replied Hinata, sending Sakura a reassuring smile. I wouldn't dream about lying to you, she promised solemnly. Besides, what could you possibly say that would make us want to lie to you? Sakura acted like as if she didn't Hinata's question. If you had to choose between a mission and an old friendship, which would you pick? She asked quietly. And what if this person was once really close to you, but has changed dramatically over the years? Is it worth forsaking a mission just because of friendship? Hinata and Ino both exchanged an uneasy look. It was obvious that Sakura was keeping something from them. No doubt it was about her mission. They couldn't help but feel lucky they weren't in Sakura's shoes at the moment. Ino stood up and tossed her head behind her back. I think the mission would be more important, she concluded stiffly. That friend of yours probably doesn't give a damn about you anymore, since love and friendship dies. I disagree, argued Hinata, crossing her arms defiantly. I would choose friendship, since no matter what you can't kill the memories that you've shared with the person. No matter how hard you try, you'd never be able to rid yourself of them. They will always be alive in you. Besides, that's what friends are for. They're made to stand by your side through rain or shine. Sakura looked at Hinata imploringly. Would you choose it if death is the consequence? She said slowly. If I don't fulfill this mission, I will be destroyed. Hinata's eyes widened in fear and shock. You have to do the mission then, she urged persistently. You can't die and leave us. You and Ino are my only friends. Hinata. You promised that you wouldn't lie to me, she said sadly. Tell me the truth. What would you do if you were in my position? Would you destroy something precious to you? Or would you risk getting destroyed yourself? She stuttered silently. I would save my friends at the risk of my own life, Hinata replied gallantly. You're kidding, right? Said Ino, staring at Hinata like as if she'd grown two heads. You actually wouldn't give a damn about what the consequences were. Hinata nodded in agreement. What are you, crazy? Exclaimed Ino, yelling at the top of her lungs. Why in the hell would you do something like that? The person deserves to die. It doesn't matter whether they were friends or not. It's the past and it would do you some good to live in the present. Sakura sighed once again while she listened to them bickering. It made sense. Both of their explanations. But the problem was, which one would she pick? What would be the right choice in this matter? Guys, I want to tell you something, she said slowly, interrupting Ino and Hinata's argument. The man that I'm ordered to kill, she took a deep breath. You both are pretty familiar with him. He went to the same school as us. Ino grumbled and plopped herself down next to Sakura. Who is it? She asked cautiously, while Hinata silently urged Sakura on. Sasuke. She whispered softly. My childhood crush. My teammate. My friend. Blood rose. What? Ino gaped at Sakura, looking horrified. You mean that Sasuke-kun is? She trailed off softly. But how could he be so cruel? Sasuke-kun would never do such a thing. Would he? Sakura sighed painfully. I don't know. I don't know what to believe in anymore. She stared down blankly at the ground. The Hokage himself told me. He might have made a mistake, suggested Hinata hopefully. After all, he only has a hunch that Sasuke was the one that actually committed those crimes. No, the case was thoroughly investigated. She paused for a moment, trying to force down the bile in her throat. And it wasn't just this incident, but so many throughout the country. Sakura threw her arms up in frustration. But that doesn't prove anything, added Ino frantically. The only evidence he has is the witness's word. He should know better than to randomly trust someone, she scowled. Every member of the Anbu believe it, replied Sakura. It doesn't matter whether or not he's innocent or not. He is still a missing nin, and has to be taken down. Hinata shot Sakura an understanding look. So you have to destroy him, she stated. Sakura bowed her head in shame. Yes, she murmured while a single tear trickled down her face. The law is my hand. If it should be soaked in blood, then so be it. Ino and Hinata exchanged a nervous glance. Look, Sakura, if it'll make you feel any better, we'd always be your friend no matter what road you decide to take, said Ino softly. That's right, exclaimed Hinata, holding up her soda can. Friends forever. Friends, they all exclaimed, dunking down a huge gulp of soda. Sakura sat back down and settled back comfortable against warm couch. Do you think I'm making the right choice? She muttered absent-mindedly. Sometimes when I really think about it, I regret becoming a hunter nin. I hate killing, especially when it's someone I once knew. Hinata sighed while she stomped over to an empty chair. There had to be something that they could do. Something that could cheer Sakura up. But what could possibly be exciting enough for her to forget about Sasuke? There was nothing. Was there? She tossed a glance at Ino and found out that she was thinking along the same lines. Hinata stared out the window. No, she wouldn't give up until she found a solution. Sakura had been her first real friend, and she would do anything to repay her for showing her the true meanings of friendship. All her life, Hinata had been timid and withdrawn. She was the heir of the Hyuga clan, and yet she was weak. Whenever she looked into her parents' eyes, she saw their shame and disgust. She wasn't worthy of being their daughter, she was nothing. But Ino and Sakura changed her whole life. They showed her that there were things other than strength and power. Hinata narrowed her eyes with determination. She wouldn't fare now, she couldn't. Ino jumped up in excitement. That's it, she shrieked cheerfully, her eyes snapping with excitement. I've got a great idea, she exclaimed, turning towards Sakura, who politely tilted an eyebrow questioningly. What? Tomorrow night is the winter solstice. The night when the blood moon shines, stated Ino, pulling out her professor's hat and a pointer. Hinata couldn't help but giggle softly at the sight. Ino in a teacher's outfit. She would have killed to see this. Since you've been away for so long, you probably weren't informed that we're having a ball tomorrow night, she muttered, her eyes sparkling queerly. A masked ball. Sasuke emerged slowly from the shadows, almost as if he'd appeared from thin air. He tilted his head and sniffed the air. And winced. The meadow here was scented, so that it smelled like flowers. His blood-red Sharingan eyes glared out of the dark, like a predator seeking out its prey. Sometimes he'd wondered how different his life would have been if he hadn't accepted the offer. If only he hadn't been so power-hungry. He violently shook his head, clearing it of any negative thoughts. The past was the past, and he had the present to think about. A slow malicious smile curled his lips. The ball was only a few hours away. How unfortunate for the village. How very unfortunate. If they discovered who he was. If any of them learned his true identity. The smile widened to show his pearly white teeth. Then he'd have no choice but to destroy them. After all, he didn't need any gossip to reach the Anbu. How foolish they must be. To send out all those hunter nins after him, when he was right under their noses. Yes. The citizens of Konoha were foolish. Too stupid to understand what was right before their eyes. He bent down and plucked a rose out of the ground. Sasuke studied it carefully. It had blood-red petals which ended at a black tip. It looked deadly. Just like himself. He gracefully plucked off one of the petals and watched it fall to the ground. Then another. One for friendship. One for loyalty. One for trust. One for honesty. And one for love. By the time he was finished, the ground was littered with crimson petals. He had enough with his past. Tomorrow night, he would come in terms with his destiny. No more regrets. No more. He'd finally be able to release the ones he once loved. His eyes sparkled with savage delight. Yes, then he'd be able to become the best that he could be, and nothing could hold him back. The past were chains on his soul. He was bound by duty and honor. He couldn't break it, not yet. Sasuke stared at the ground. At the petals. He gathered his charka and shouted, "Fire flower!" Almost instantly the whole clearing was engulfed in flames. It would end soon. The pain of friendship. Loyalty. Every falsehood he'd been taught in the past. The blood-red petals withered in the fire, before turning into ash, just like he was planning to do with everything. And everyone in his past. Tomorrow. Konoha would either experience its most painful and exciting day ever. He turned on heel and trudged slowly towards the woods, where the shadows loomed with a cruel and dark insanity. And Sasuke once again disappeared into the darkened abyss. The fire continued to burn feverishly, but for some reason, a gentle wind blew through the clearing. Drops of dew trickled off the cherry blossoms and soothed the flame. Everything had a price. The question was whether it was worth it. A few hours before the ball, Sakura-chan. "You're messing up your makeup," cried Hinata, flinging her arms up in distress. "You have to sit still." Sakura sighed dramatically. If there was anything in the world she hated, it was defiantly makeup. She always felt so awkward in it. Like as if she was hiding her true self and hiding under a mask of deceit. Her lips tightened into an ironic smile. That was the whole point of the ball, wasn't it? To face the unknown. To be something you're not. All right, replied Sakura, holding her hands up defensively. "I'll sit still," she mumbled when Ino shot her a dangerous glare, telling her she better get her ass back in her chair pronto. "That's better," said Ino, giving Sakura a satisfied look. She turned towards Hinata. "Let's get to work." Hinata worked on Sakura's hair, while her dexterous fingers skillfully twisted and bounded with an impossible speed. While on the other hand Ino was proficiently applying a generous amount of makeup. Sakura couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. What were they doing to her? She hated it when she wasn't in control. Especially when it was over herself. Deep down she knew she should be thankful. Hinata and Ino were well known for their tastes in hair design and makeup. Are you guys finished yet?" Ino shot her a bristling glare which made Sakura instantly shut up. After an hour or so of hard work and dedication on Hinata and Ino's part, they were finished. "Here," chirped Hinata, handing Sakura a silver-polished mirror. She exchanged a look with Ino and smiled with joy. It's been such a long time since they've hanged out together. Much less. One of the few times they could actually help Sakura with anything. Whenever Sakura was around, everything was always exciting and unpredictable. Sakura stared at her reflection and gasped in surprise. She looked gorgeous and far more desirable than she felt. She ran towards Hinata and Ino and gave them both a bear hug. "You guys are the best," she exclaimed cheerfully, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. Her face was delicately framed with sausage curls, while the rest of her hair was piled elegantly above her head. Her emerald green eyes shone with a dark and mysterious light. Sakura's flawless skin had a light blush to it, while her lips were pink and glittery. Ino and Hinata both returned the hug fiercely. "You're welcome, Sakura-chan," murmured Hinata softly. "I'm glad you're back." "Me too," added Ino, while she took a quick calculating glacé at Sakura. "Don't you dare cry," she ordered quickly, when she noticed the tears in her eyes. "You'll mess up your makeup." Sakura nodded, and turned towards the Herpine wardrobe. "What should I wear?" she asked nervously. "I don't have anything formal," she said miserably. "You could wear one of ours," suggested Hinata, tugging her towards their duffel bags. "We brought along extra outfits since we were worried you didn't have enough." Ino pounced on the duffel bags and dug furiously through it. "I know the perfect outfit for you," she muttered, flinging clothes all over the room. "Where is it?" she snarled. Hinata and Sakura both ducked while a tornado fully composed of clothes came towards them. "Ino, calm down," exclaimed Sakura, trying to edge closer, to somehow stop her from wrecking the whole room. "Found it." Sakura and Hinata both sighed in relief when Ino came up to them. "Here, try this on for size," she said brightly, holding out the dress for Sakura's inspection. It was a two-piece dress with a sheer silvery halter top with the bottom elegantly torn to display her flat stomach. The skirt flared down to her ankles and lay in a pool at her feet. Around her shoulders was a light silk shawl that draped elegantly around her. Sakura had on a pair of diamond earrings while a crystal heart hung around her neck. She had on 2 bracelets that sparkled with her inner fire. She picked up her favorite mask. That had once been her mother's and gently placed it around her face. The mask was ivory white and had pearls decking the edges. However, it was fairly small and only covered her eyes and a bit of her cheeks. In other words, it was enough to keep anyone from recognizing her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice husky with suppressed emotion. Sakura stopped for a second and studied their appearances. "What are you guys going to wear?" she asked, looking puzzled. Hinata and Ino looked down at themselves and gasped with shock. They'd been so busy with Sakura they'd forgotten about themselves. They quickly hurried around searching for their supplies. After all, the ball starts in a little less than an hour. Sasuke grimly stepped out of the alley and searched for any sign of life. He'd finally reached the Konoha village, the place that he'd once called home. He shook his head despairingly. But no more. He belonged with the Sound Ninjas now. It was his destiny, his life. He'd come into Konoha with mixed emotions. He wanted to destroy all of those he'd considered precious in his past. And yet, he wanted to embrace them. Beg for their forgiveness. Why were things so hard for him? Even all these years living in the harsh and cruel society of the Sound, he still hasn't been fully corrupted. He still possessed some emotions. Some sense of honor. He smirked lightly. Well, at least enough to not to torture his victims that much before they died. His smile died. He was still bound by his past. His conscience would sometimes get the best of him. And ruining everything made him weak. Sasuke's eyes hardened. Weak. How he detested that word. He'd always been weak for most of his life. Never able to accomplish his dream. His revenge. His family and clan were dead. All because of him. All because he'd been too weak to defend them against his brother. If only things had been different. If only destiny hadn't been so cruel. If only things didn't turn out the way it did. But would that be for the better or for the worse? If his family and clan were still alive, we wouldn't have ever met Sakura or Naruto or Kakashi. He wouldn't have ever learned the true meaning of friendship and teamwork. He sighed sadly. But he would have been loved. Would have been respected. Sasuke leaned against the wall and stared blankly at the ground. Things always happen for a reason. Always. Maybe it was his destiny to be alone for the rest of his life. To be hated by all. Sasuke shook his head to rid himself of these distracting thoughts. It mattered not. He had a ball to attend. And old friends to see. And maybe destroy. He trudged carefully on towards the building where the dance would take place. While Sasuke passed one of the young men. Sasuke skillfully slipped off his mask. He smiled grudgingly. That one wouldn't need it. Sasuke slipped the stolen mask onto his face and waited patiently for his prey. Unexpected surprises. Sakura elegantly tilted her chin and stepped out of the carriage, while Ino and Hinata followed suit. Let's just say the village made a few special preparations for the ball. Tonight they was beautiful. The moon shone lustrously, almost like a bright ornament you would place on a tree. However, Sakura couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. Something was going to happen tonight. All her instincts screamed at her, telling her to leave, telling her that death was coming. Sakura hesitated for a moment before shaking it off. It was probably just the aftershock from discovering that Sasuke was a murderer. Or maybe she was just a bit nervous about the dance. A bit too much for comfort. Ino and Hinata were chatting brightly behind her, while she walked forward without a sound. She didn't hear anything they said. Nothing. She was too lost in her emotions, her thoughts to bother. There were too many damned shadows around here. Too many places to hide. A skilled assassin could hide and kill anyone he pleased easily. There was nothing here that could stop him. Sakura smirked. Nothing except her. Almost all the residents of Konoha knew nothing about her true profession. Nothing about her true power. The only ones that had any idea were the Anbu and her friends. And a selected few. Sakura looked down at her dress and smiled. Who would think of her as a threat? Who would be foolish enough to mess with her? She stared blankly towards the flower bed, trying to look interested. There were secrets within secrets. A deeper meaning to things. Tonight was too perfect. It was the kind of night when the evil ones walk the land. She knew deep down that things wouldn't last. That things die. Sakura felt tears come to her eyes. Things had been so perfect, yet so ethereal. When Sasuke had lived among them, he'd somehow warmed her heart, but also broke it. When she thought of him, it was always with mixed emotions. Sasuke was like a storm, so unpredictable yet dangerous. Her eyes hardened into dark green stones. It mattered not what happened in the past. Only the present was important. Sakura bowed her head in pain. She had orders that she wouldn't dare disobey. Orders to kill and destroy. Sakura jumped when Hinata gently prodded her arm. Sakura-chan? She asked meekly, her eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? You looked like as if you were going to cry, she said slowly. She forced a smile, and shook her head in disagreement. Sakura was afraid that if she spoke now, Hinata would notice the quiver in her voice. She couldn't afford displaying her weaknesses, even if it was only to Hinata. After a few minutes of silence, she finally forced out the words. I'm fine, Hinata-kun, choked Sakura. Really? She persisted when she noticed the hesitant look in Hinata's eyes. Shika! Exclaimed Ino, completely unaware of Sakura and Hinata while she ran forward in joy. She threw herself into his arms and leaned fully against him. She gasped half in surprise and delight when Shikamaru presented her with a bouquet of white roses. For my favorite lady, he whispered softly, giving her a quick peck on the cheek. Ino turned towards them, with her eyes sparkling with joy. Shikamaru and I are engaged, she said cheerfully, holding out her hand for Sakura's inspection. When did this happen? She asked weakly. Sakura mentally scolded herself for being away for so long. A few months ago, replied Shikamaru, stepping up next to them. I proposed to Ino on her 21st birthday, he said proudly. Ino sighed with delight. Yes. It was so romantic. Both of them stared deeply into each other's eyes and beeped deeply. Sakura leaned towards Hinata and whispered, I think the lovebirds need some privacy. She hinted, while she motioned for them to enter the ball. Hinata instantly agreed, and allowed Sakura to practically drag her towards the door. Sakura-chan. I can walk Yanoe. She whined, rubbing her sore arm. Sorry. Muttered Sakura, turning towards Hinata. Is there anything you have to tell me? I've had enough surprises tonight. She huffed with annoyance. Anything? She asked plaintively. Hinata hesitated while her cheeks flamed. Well, I was going to tell you. She murmured half to herself. But you were so upset about Sasuke. I couldn't bring myself to goad about my good luck. And that is. Naruto asked me out. She whispered, her eyes shining with love and joy. He finally noticed me. Sasuke couldn't help but admit that was totally unsuspected. Through the years, she'd always known about Hinata's constant crush on Naruto. But she had dismissed it. After all, Naruto was a bit too thick-headed to decipher any hints. It seemed like Naruto had grown up, had finally figured out how to access that bit of fluff that he called a brain. How long have you guys been dating? Hinata looked a bit uncomfortable. That's kind of hard to say, she said slowly. Naruto began to show interest in me a few months ago, but he didn't have the guts to ask me out until a few weeks ago. I'm glad, replied Sakura sincerely. You two make a cute couple. Yay. I know. Hinata had just spotted Naruto in the crowd. She shot him a wistful look before turning to Sakura. Sakura-chan. I have to go now. Naruto's is here, she exclaimed joyously. Her face turned serious. If you need anything, just ask me or Ino, she said before running towards Naruto. Sakura sighed half with relief and sadness while she watched Hinata run away. Both Ino and Hinata had a guy. Had a soulmate. Someone who loves them, and yet, she didn't. Was she destined to be alone? To spend the rest of her life wondering about? To never feel loved? She had practically given up on love. After all, it was just an illusion, wasn't it? Something that masked the truth. Something that had no meaning whatsoever. Sakura had once loved a young man. But he. Sakura felt herself stiffen. What was she doing? Why was she picking at her old scars? She had to hide from them. It was painful. So painfully, she had to bury them deep. So that no one, not even herself, would be able to uncover them. Death seemed like a small price to pay compared to the truth. The truth of her past. She daintily climbed off the finally ladder of stairs that led up to the ballroom. Sakura studied the door with a bit of fascination. It was old-fashioned, with mysterious carvings on it. But those cuts that ran from the top of the frame to the bottom, they looked like blood. Sakura gathered up her strength and pushed open the door. Moonlight encounter. Sakura's eyes widened at the sight in front of her. Never in her life had she seen anything quite so beautiful. She felt like as if she was caught in a medieval fantasy. Right now, she felt like a princess when she walked through the high silk curtained doors. When she entered, she instantly spotted two staircases with the hardwood rails that led down to the dance floor. Sakura couldn't help but notice that they looked really great for sliding. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. All thoughts of Sasuke escaped her mind. She was here to have fun, and she was definably going to enjoy herself tonight. Sakura raised her chin and walked elegantly down the long winding staircase. All eyes were fixed on Sakura. It had been a while since anyone in the village had seen hair or hide of her. Then again, it could be because she looked gorgeous and stunning. Sakura smirked when she spied Naruto and Hinata dancing exuberantly below. They were seriously such a cute couple. She knew that Hinata had discovered her soulmate, the one person that would stand by her side throughout her life. It was truly disappointing that she hadn't discovered the man of her dreams. When she was young, she'd been obsessed with illusions of love. But now, she knew better. Years of training had hardened her resolve and squashed all her childhood fantasies. She knew that it was dangerous to love someone, to wear your heart in your sleeve for everyone to see. Sakura frowned slightly. She'd learned that emotions were for the weak, that it would be safer to keep your distance for everyone, or else you might get hurt. By the time Sakura finally reached the bottom of the stairs, there was a group of young men waiting to ask her to dance. She sent each of them a cool and sharp smile, which scared away most of them. Sakura's mouth twisted into one of pure amusement. She had a habit of scaring off suitors, even when she had been young. They'd call her the Ice Princess. Well, wasn't that what she was now? She stared down at her silvery outfit. Her face was one carved from ice, beautiful yet cold. Ever since she'd made her first kill, she'd given up her warm and caring facade. She'd changed so much over the years. Only her close friends could see a hint of the girl she'd once been, and the innocent and carefree life she'd once lived. Sakura made her way towards the reception table to greet the hosts. "Hello, Kakashi-san," she said cheerfully, before she noticed the Hokage standing next to him. "Hello, Hokage-san," she muttered politely. For some reason she felt like she had to get away from him. She was afraid that he was going to pester her about why she hadn't done anything about Sasuke. And she didn't want to think about it. Sasuke wasn't here, and she'd be pissed beyond reason if she was asked to leave the ball for some stupid mission after her childhood friend. "Excuse me, but I need some fresh air," she murmured softly before turning tail and walked slowly and deliberately towards the gardens. Before she left, she saw Kakashi's nervous, yet tense look, as if he knew something she didn't. Something that he wanted to tell her, but was afraid to say in front of the Hokage. She needed some time alone. Some time to get her thoughts together. Sakura almost sighed with relief when she felt the cool night air against her skin. It seemed like the world was against her. Like as if she was standing alone above a bottomless chasm. Sakura looked around, taking in her surroundings. Its colorful flowers littered the gardens, covering every inch. There was a Japanese stone bench that stood facing the gigantic stone waterfall. And if viewed at the right time, the sun would rise behind it, just like a beautiful painting. It was beautiful. Truly beautiful. Sakura sat down and stared in awe at the waterfall. It was so majestic. So frightening. The rocks that littered the bottom of the falls were sharp and deadly. If one accidentally fell off, she winced. It would kill and mangle their bodies beyond belief. Sakura hoped deftly that Konoha had taken extra precautions to make sure no one might get hurt. "There's a thin line between something that's dangerous and something that's beautiful, isn't there?" whispered a husky voice behind her. Sakura gasped in shock and turned around. She'd been too caught up in her thoughts to hear the sound of footsteps behind her. Sakura mentally scowled herself. She was too old to be making such stupid mistakes. If this had been a life or death situation, she'd have already died. Sakura's eyes widened when she saw the masked man. His darkly hair reflected some of the moonlight, while his lips were curled in a sadistic yet gentle smile. His body was muscular and moved with a feline grace. Nerveless, he was one of the most handsome men she'd ever met. But what caught her attention was his eyes. Those dark onyx orbs remind her of something. Of someone. Those eyes that caressed her with disturbing warmth and anger. She'd seen those eyes somewhere before, but where? Trying to buy herself some time, she asked, "Who are you?" The man chuckled softly, which caused Sakura to flinch. It sounded like the devil laughing. "You don't remember me?" he whispered, moving closer, until they were inches apart. He shook his finger at her and muttered, "Well, that's a shame, but I know who you are, Sakura." Unwanted affections. Sakura took a step back. Her head was swimming with questions. Who was he? How did he know her name? And why did he sound so familiar? Almost like as if she'd met him somewhere before. "How do you know my name?"
The onyx-haired man shook his head mockingly. Does it matter? He whispered, causing the hair on Sakura's back to stand on end. I know so much about you, Sakura. So much, he said, his voice sounding like soft velvet.
Sakura couldn't help but feel a bit intimidated. Although she'd never admit it, she felt like as if she was being cornered against a wall, with nowhere to run. She beeped in a deep breath, her voice coming out in an angry hiss. And if there was one thing in the world she hated, it was feeling disconcerted. The tension in the air was building between them. The masked man tilted an eyebrow at her in amusement, as if he enjoyed getting her riled up. Do you really want to know who I am? He said softly. She shot him a look that said, duh. Sakura had enough with games. She was going to find out the truth about her stalker, even if it killed her. A feral smile twisted itself upon his lips. Sasuke felt the inner demon inside of him take control. While the darker side of him took control, he was going to have so much fun toying with Sakura's mind. All thoughts of regaining Sakura back as a friend disappeared from his mind. Nothing mattered except the gorgeous girl standing a few feet away from him. One of the unlucky few that would be getting his full attention tonight. Why should I? He murmured slowly, taking another step towards Sakura until his mouth lightly brushed against her ear. He smirked when he heard Sakura's breath quicken. Give me one. Good. Reason, he said, raining beepies down Sakura's neck. Sakura let out a soft moan of pleasure. She couldn't think, but there was something important. Something that she needed to remember. Someone. The dark stranger ran one of his hands through the full length of her silky hair, while the other was wrapped around her petite waist. Come on. You must have some reason, he taunted, beeping her full in the mouth. Their tongues battled for dominance, while he held her closer and closer. That's what I thought, he muttered huskily, weaving his seduction web around her. Sakura sighed softly. Never had she felt pleasure like this, and such love. She paused. Was this love? Or was it just an illusion that made her want to surrender her body and soul to a stranger? The onyx-haired man's hands slowly slid beneath her clothes. He felt a twinge of guilt at the action. Something deep inside of him was telling him to stop. Or else he might hurt her. For the first time in his life, he hesitated. In that short amount of time, Sakura was able to regain enough of her senses to realize the position she was in. Her eyes widened in shock and fear, while she pushed him off. Sakura couldn't believe what she was about to do. She wasn't a slut, and it was beyond her morals to do such a thing, especially with a stranger. She felt furious tears well up at the edges of her eyes. She couldn't help but feel like as if she'd betrayed herself. She was supposed to be the strongest in Konoha, and yet she couldn't even defend herself from the unwanted affections of a dead beepy man. What the hell? Unwanted? Dang girl, you gotta have enjoyed it, XD. What were the chances she'd survive an encounter with Sasuke then? She was growing soft. And someday it might even kill her. Her eyes hardened. It was a choice between life and death. And she would easily choose life over death any day, wouldn't she? The stranger looked down at his feet as if he was mentally scolding himself about something. He sighed sadly. He hadn't meant to take advantage of Sakura. It had been an accident. A complete accident. There were times when he embraced the crueler side of himself. The evil side. But no matter what, he hadn't been able to go through with it. The thought of seeing Sakura's pained eyes hurt him beyond belief. Especially if he was the cause of that pain and distress. He paused. But hadn't he hurt her by leaving? By deserting her? Sakura wasn't strong physically, and wasn't ever. She needed all the help she could get from her teammates to get through the missions. She had brains, beauty, but not strength. He doubted she'd ever become strong enough to defend herself. They both stood in silence trying to regain their composure. After a few minutes of dead silence, the man decided to speak. You said you wanted to know my name, he muttered once again, slowly raising his eyes to meet hers. Sakura nodded in agreement, since she was unable to speak. Then I want you to do something for me. What? I wish to have the pleasure of dancing with you tonight. *****. Wow. Sasuke sure is unpredictable, trust me. A dance? Muttered Sakura looking confused. Who was this guy? One second he's seducing her, the next he's making a bargain with her. How strange. You're kidding, right? She hissed in disbelief. The young man shook his head. I'm serious. Sakura. he said slowly, regaining his deadly charm. All I'm asking is a little dance. Nothing special.
Besides, what could you lose? Sakura bit her lip. He was right, like usual. It wouldn't do her any harm. Besides, her curiosity was killing her. She'd promised earlier that she would do anything in her power to discover who this man was. Her eyes narrowed with determination. And she sure as hell wasn't going to give up now.
All she had to do was dance the night away with him. The beepiest man she'd ever met. Sakura's eyes widened with shock. Where did that come from? The dance was going to be strictly business, nothing more. All right. She murmured softly. Sakura tossed her head proudly and stared Sasuke straight in the eye. I accept your offer, she snapped, half surprised when she saw a flicker of amusement cross his eyes. But, how'd I know you'd tell me? The dark stranger gave her a wolfish smile. You don't, he replied calmly. That's why you've got to trust me. Sakura shot him a dubious look. Trust a stranger? Especially one that just tried to seduce her? How stupid does he think she is? She felt her face heat with anger. He sighed. You're not stupid, Sakura, he replied, almost as if he knew what she was thinking. It's your choice. I won't force you to dance with me if you don't want to. Those eyes. Those dark onyx eyes were so compelling. So familiar. For some reason Sakura couldn't force herself to look away. There was something in there. Something that reminded her of someone she once knew. Someone that had been very close to her. And that voice. That deep masculine voice. It revived memories that she'd hidden from everyone. Even herself. Sakura knew that she couldn't and wouldn't rest until she discovered who he was. Sakura took a deep breath and slipped her arm into his. All right, let's dance. The man smiled. This time it wasn't a smirk, not cruel in any way. It was true smile. It was real. Let's go then, he whispered softly, leading her towards the dance floor. However, before he left, he tossed a glance at the waterfall, as if there was something secret about it, something that only he knew. When he'd lived with his clan, before his brother, Sasuke spat out the word like a curse. Before his brother had destroyed them. His father had once said something to him. Something dreadfully importantly. If you want to seduce someone, do it in a dance. It was a pretty inappropriate thing to tell a young boy, but for some unknown reason Sasuke's always remembered it. And now, he wanted Sakura. Wanted to be with her. To enjoy dancing with her. Just being with her. He took a deep breath and inhaled her scent. It smelled like cherry blossoms. He smirked with delight. She hadn't changed one bit. None at all. Slowly the two owned them walked onto the dance floor. Instantly all eyes flew on them. After all, they were the handsomest couple around. Sakura couldn't help but smile. For some unknown reason, she felt complete tonight. Like as if she'd discovered a part of herself that she'd never known she had. Like as if she belonged with the dark stranger. Like as if they were made for each other. Captive heart. Tonight the moon shone gently across the star-streaked sky. The wind whispered softly through the tress. The grass. While the crickets chirped with passionate delight. It was beautiful. Everything was so perfect. So ethereal. Sakura sighed in pleasure as she leaned against the dark stranger and slowly inhaled his deep masculine scent. For some reason, Sakura felt complete tonight. Like as if she had found her other self. Sasuke grinned mentally to himself. He hadn't really actually held Sakura before. It felt strange. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel alone. And lost. He had been a fool to walk away from them. His friends. His life. Why hadn't he taken the time to appreciate them while he still could? Ever since they'd first met, Sasuke had known that Sakura had a crush on him, but he'd never acknowledged that. He always pushed her away, broke her heart, and insulted her. She didn't deserve it. She was innocent, unlike himself. He'd tried everything to become stronger, training non-stop in the village in hopes of someday becoming strong enough to defeat Itachi. He had no need for a distraction such as Sakura, or so he thought. Loneliness, pain, those were the deadly inflictions that Itachi left on his soul. For the rest of his life, he'd thought that he'd always be alone. That was until Sakura came along. She healed his wounds, showed him friendship and love. He bowed his head in shame. And this was how he repaid her, by tearing out her heart.
Sakura had known all along that he'd been planning to leave. That night before he left, he saw her.
She'd poured out her heart to him. Told him to take her away with him. That it didn't matter that she had friends and family here. Things wouldn't be the same without him. Sasuke sighed with pain. And he'd told her to stay. That he was nothing like her in Naruto. That she was annoying. Sakura looked up, just in time to see the self-disgust in his eyes. She looked momentarily puzzled. What was wrong with him? Are you all right? She asked gently, tilting her head questioningly. The mystery man nodded silent, while the band struck up a new tune. I see him walking, I sense the danger. I hear his voice, and my heart stops. It hurt him. To hold Sakura so close, yet feel so apart. It was impossible that Sakura still had any feels towards him. He wouldn't have blamed her if she hated him. He wears a face of the night. Ooh, the perfect stranger. And I'm fallen, ready or not. Sakura studied the man against her carefully. There was something about him. Something so familiar. The song reminded her of something, of someone. Don't think about it. Who knows where the wind blows? No doubt about it. I'll go where he goes. Sakura felt her lips part slowly with remembrance. She'd once said those words so a man that she'd loved. My captive heart. He holds the key to these emotions. My willing soul. Let me drown in this ocean. And I carry the flame. Like I did from the start. As long as he's callin', my captive heart. Sakura felt her eyes start to water. It had hurt. So much. But she refrained from crying. That bastard isn't worthy of my tears. She lifted her chin up and stared deeply into the stranger's eyes. She was going to forget about Sasuke. He'd never wanted anything to do with her. And she wasn't going to waste her whole life waiting for him to get a life. Fire burns, so I've been told. But I like the way it feels. He has the wild passion. That drives away the cold. And I know his touch is real. Don't think about it. He leads and I'll follow. No doubt about it. I'll go where he goes. He'd betrayed her, and their village, and the punishment is death. Unknown to her. A single tear escaped her guard and trickled down her cheek. She bowed her head, partially angry at her lack of control, while she looked down at her shoe. He holds the key to these emotions. Let me drown in this ocean, and I play my part, as long as he's callin', my willing soul. Sasuke frowned. He hated it when Sakura cried. It always made him angry that someone would want to hurt her. He winced. And he hadn't done such a great job himself. Out of everyone else, he'd made her cry more than everyone else put together. What's wrong? Sakura shook her head softly, carefully avoiding eye contact. Nothing. She whispered softly, her voice betraying her pain. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. The song just reminded me of someone that had once been very close to me. It doesn't matter. He left. And he's not coming back, she concluded lamely. Never. She heard the dark-haired stranger take a deep breath and ask, what was his name? His name was Sasuke. Confessions. Sasuke remained impassive with indecipherable expression in his eyes. Unconsciously his fingers flexed back and forth reflexively, while his eyes twitched slightly. Sakura sighed softly, too lost in her emotions to notice the erotic stranger standing beside her. Her dark emerald eyes beheld a haunted glaze, one that was so empty, so lost. He reached down and pulled her protectively against him, glad to feel her gentle warmth against him. I'm sorry. He whispered awkwardly, his breath tickling her ear. It must have been hard for you to get over him. Sakura hesitated before nodding absent-mindedly. Do you know what's funny? She said lightly, her eyes filled with pain. I've loved him ever since I've met him. And not once had he ever returned it. I wasted all those years chasing the impossible, hoping that he'd someday learn to love me. She let out an empty laugh. It seems like fate always turns up when it's least wanted, she said curtly. Well, that bastard got what he wanted. She snapped, her voice filled with disgust. Power. That's all he cares about. All that he's ever cared about. Sasuke ground his teeth. No matter how much he wanted to deny it. He knew that Sakura was right. After all, what kind of idiot would sacrifice everything he had? Friends. His village. His life. Just for the mere illusion of power. He'd known all along. when he joined Orkamaru, that he'd be nothing more than a slave. A pawn in a chess game. But the thought of killing Itachi, the thought of splatter the walls with his blood was so entrancing. He shook his head defiantly. Sasuke growled furiously at himself. What was he doing? He had a chance now to make amends with Sakura, to let her know the truth, to rectify his mistake. Sasuke knew that no matter what, he couldn't stand it if Sakura hated him for the rest of his life. It hurt. That the only person that had truly cared about him, the only one that had always been there for him, didn't believe in him anymore. Sakura, he murmured slowly, waiting until he was sure he had her full undivided attention. Sasuke stared into her eyes, momentarily lost in those emerald depths. I have to tell you something, he swallowed nervously. Sakura tilted her eyebrows in confusion. Yes? She asked curiously. She unceremoniously wiped the tears off her face, before facing him once again. Sasuke took a deep breath, weighing out his words. The truth is. His eyes widened with surprise when a blonde-haired girl suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Sakura-chan. She hissed nervously, her eyes darting around as if she was expecting something to happen. Kakashi want to speak with you. Please. She begged, when Ino saw the annoyed look in Sakura's eyes. It's important. He tilted his eyebrows questioningly. He had to admit, Ino had changed a lot over the years. However, what shocked him the most was the almost casual tone she was using with Sakura. If he didn't know any better, he would have sworn that they were friends. What? Snapped Sakura, obviously not pleased. She didn't give a damn what the Kakashi wanted. She wanted to know what her dark-haired stranger was about to confess to her. What's so important? She repeated slowly. Ino's eyes were white with fear, while her normally rosy complexion was deathly pale. Someone was murdered. Ice and shadows. Sakura felt all the color drain from her face. She felt her hands shaking with fear. Someone had died. No. Been murdered. Right under her very nose. She should have known that something was off. She should have felt the danger. She should have protected them. And now, their blood was in her hands. Her fault. Always her fault. When she'd become a hunter nin, she'd promised herself that she'd protect the village. No matter the cost. She closed her eyes in pain. In anger. She'd failed them. All of them. The wind howled with agony, lashing painfully against them. Sakura shivered slightly. Something wasn't right here. Something was definitely off. The air bristled from an unknown disturbance, as if something was out there, waiting for her. Waiting to destroy her, once and for all. She took a nervous glance outside, and suppressed a gasp of shock. Eyes. Dark red eyes, heavily framed by dark lashes, were staring straight at her. Before disappearing. The whole building was coated in ice. Frozen stiff, so cold, so deadly. Sakura shook her head from side to side, trying to clear her mind. She instantly shot a causal yet probing look around the room. It seemed so unreal. Everything. As if no one else could see it. As if she was going mad. The music flowed peacefully through the room, while everyone moved slowly to the beat, as if they were in some sort of a trance. Around her, she heard women gossiping about their boyfriends, and lovers whispering in the shadows. But didn't anyone, besides her, feel the dark power that loomed outside? The massive power that could easily destroy Konoha. A power even stronger than her own. Sakura trembled from head to toe. How she hated this emotion. How she hated feeling weak and helpless. She just wasn't strong enough. Not this time. Sakura, are you all right? Asked Ino, looking at her cautiously. You don't look so well. Sakura blinked, and the haunting images disappeared. I'm fine, she said shortly, carefully avoiding Ino's worried expression. It wasn't the time to think about this. She could worry about it some other time. Right now, she had to deal with Ino. Who died? She whispered solemnly. Who was it? She repeated, giving Ino a small shake. Was it anyone that we knew? Ino looked almost hysterical. I don't know, she cried frantically, wringing her hands in desperation. Kakashi just told me to find you. He said that someone had been killed. She took a deep breath and swallowed the bile that threatened to overflow. You should have seen him. I've never, ever, seen him so serious, so upset before. Sasuke's eyes widened slightly. Kakashi? Upset? Something was defiantly wrong. He'd never seen any emotion from his easygoing sensei. He was a mystery. A puzzle that he couldn't quite piece together. He stared outside, just as Sakura had done. He'd been foolish letting his guard down, especially around her. Sasuke flinched when he felt the power that radiated outside. Like a storm preparing to strike. A maelstrom. Sasuke's eyes hardened with anger. That power, that unknown Charka belonged to the man he'd sworn to kill. The one who he gave up his freedom to destroy. The only other survivor of his clan. He forced himself to remain calm, to think rationally. Sakura. She was in danger. Deep danger. It took all his will not to bolt out of the building and duke it out. A battle till the death. With his brother. Sakura needed to be protected. Somehow. He knew that he couldn't stand it if she got hurt, not again. Sakura had been hurt enough. She didn't need to reliving the pain again, especially when she didn't deserve it. He had broken her heart once, and he'd be damned to do it again. Sasuke furiously ground his teeth together. How he wanted to fight. To kill. To feel his brother's blood running through his fingers. To tear him to pieces. One by one. To make him feel every ounce of pain he deserved. But he couldn't. Not now, not until Sakura was safe. Well, what are we waiting for? Snapped Sakura, regaining her composure. Led the way. We have a murderer on the loose. Her mysterious green eyes hardened with anger. He won't get away. Not now. Not ever. She whispered quietly, however her voice was cold. So cold that it caused Sasuke to flinch slightly. I'll show him. Why? He shouldn't mess with anyone in this village. Ino gulped fearfully while she stared at Sakura with empty eyes. It was times like these when Ino truly understood the power that lied within her pink-haired friend. She had changed so much. Had gotten so much stronger when she trained with the other hunter nins. Sometimes, it was hard. Trying to find the girl that she'd once known underneath that cold and self-assured mask. Sometimes, it felt like as if she'd lost her best friend. But she didn't fear her. It was impossible. Ino knew that no matter what, Sakura would never, ever hurt them. She had too much honor to do that, to hurt someone close to her. Sakura had been devastated when she discovered that Sasuke had left to join the Sound Ninjas. She had somehow broken a piece of her heart. All right. She muttered softly, her sapphire blue eyes filling with tears. Ino couldn't help but pity Sakura. She had lost everything the day Sasuke deserted her. All her dreams. Her life. They were the only people left, her friends. While on the other hand, Ino hadn't been heartbroken when Sasuke left. In fact, she had only been shocked. After all, who would have thought, the boy that she'd had a crush on, would do something so heartless, something so cruel. But she had Shikamaru, and eventually she'd forgotten about Sasuke. Ino threw a glance at Sakura and frowned. She knew that Sakura hadn't gotten over him, not yet, not ever. She forced a smile and gently tugged on Sakura's arm. Well, let's go, she exclaimed with false enthusiasm. Let's go so you could kick that bastard's ass. Sakura lifted a finely shaped eyebrow in amusement. Some things just never change. Ino always had a habit of doing the most awkward things and mercurial things. Well, lead the way, she commanded slowly, completely forgetting about her mysterious partner. That is, until she felt herself trapped in his tight embrace. Where are you going? He questioned softly, his warm breath tickling her cheek. Did you forget about me? He asked in mock innocence. Sakura frowned while she unsuccessfully tried to push him away. Let go of me. She hissed, half of her wanting to stay in his arms forever, the other half was angry. Very, very angry. I have important things to do, she snapped. Things that aren't you business. Oh, and what are those things? He whispered seductively, slowly beeping her neck. I don't think that it's safe for you to go there, alone. What are you implying? She growled, trying to ignore the feel of his warm lips against her skin. That I'm too weak to defend myself? That I'm weak and defenseless little girl? She asked, trying to control her anger. I think that it'd be better if I come along, he murmured gently in her ear. After all, I could keep you company. His face twisted into a smirk. Especially in this weather, he said, raising his arms to indicate the ice that surround the building. In more ways than one, he muttered, his eyes flashing with amusement. Sakura felt her mouth drop. Who was this man? What gave him the right to speak to her that way? She wasn't a slut, and she sure as hell wasn't going to jump into him bed. Well, at least, not anytime soon. Well, what do you say? He whispered, running his hands down to her petite waist and pulling her closer. I promise you that you won't regret it. Fine, she exclaimed, close to yelling. Fine, you could come if you want, but don't try anything. She growled out, pushing herself away from him. I'm not going to be held responsible for you. So remember when you're lying dead against the ground, that this was your idea. Sasuke smirked. All right. Sakura sighed and walked towards where Ino, who was standing with her mouth hanging open. Let's go, she said weakly, turning her back to Sakura. Things were definitely weird when Sakura was around. Ino paused while she kept darting, looking back at Sakura's dark stranger. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she'd seen him before. Somewhere. If only she could remember. Meanwhile, Sasuke chuckled softly under his breath. He wouldn't allow anything to happen to Sakura. Nothing. She hasn't changed one bit over the years. She was still a pretty yet fragile flower that could break easily, wasn't she? Innocent deceptions. Sakura shot a glare over her shoulder towards her darkly erotic stranger. She hated him for making her feel this way, making her feel so weak, so fragile, making her want to fall into his arms and let him take care of her for the rest of her life. Unconsciously, she wrung her hands nervously. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She was supposed to have cut off all her emotions, all her ties when she became a hunter nin. She couldn't love anyone, it was impossible. She had her heart broken once, and she sure as hell wasn't going to allow some drop-dead gorgeous guy to hurt her again. Sakura lifted her head with an ounce of pride. She'd learned so much ever since Sasuke had left her for the Sound. As a matter of fact, her friends had worried about her. She smirked slightly. Ever since that fateful day, Sakura had given up on love. She didn't need anyone. Not anymore. She hadn't ever truly smiled again. Not once. Oh, sure, she would smile from time to time. But it was forced. And tight-lipped. And never reached her eyes. Eyes that were as dark as the evergreen forest. Eyes that were often filled with determination and anger. The calm musical atmosphere seemed so surreal. So diaphanous. Like a dream. It was amazing how the worst things always occur during the most magical moment of the night. A dream. A perfect, beauteous dream. Sakura frowned. When she had been nothing more than a child, she'd always loved fairy tales. The ones where things always seemed to have a touch of magic. It would be amazing. The thought of living happily ever after. She lowered her eyes in pain. The years as a genii were one of the best years of her life. They've all gone through so much together. They'd laughed together. Fought together. Protected each other. And loved each other. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Love. What was she? Crazy. Sasuke hadn't ever given a damn about them. They were only a burden for him. Something that prohibited him from accomplishing his task. His revenge. Sakura shook her head slowly from side to side and forced herself to return to the present. She had enough things to deal with at the moment. And she didn't need her brain turning into mush at a time like this. The village was in danger. And it was her job to protect it. At all costs. She tensed when she felt the wind's ice breath lash against her skin. Ino had led them back towards the garden. The exact same one she'd run off to. And met. The dark stranger. A soft hiss escaped her throat when she felt the flickers of charka around her. Someone obviously possessed a deadly amount of power. The trees were torn and scattered about like toothpicks. The once beautifully bright flowers lay dead and dull upon the ground. Sakura frowned. There was something on the ground. Something. Red. She bent down to examine it more. And gasped. Blood. The whole ground was drenched with blood. It looked like as if the person had been killed violently. had been tortured before they were killed. Sakura closed her eyes in pain. It was bad enough having to deal with a murderer, but now she had to deal with a psychopath. With all her heart, Sakura wished that it wasn't someone that she knew. Someone that she'd been close to. She would be inflicted with so much guilt and remorse that she probably wouldn't have the will to live. Sakura couldn't help but feel scared and hopeless. It was only a matter of time until the truth revealed itself. All she could do was hope that fate wouldn't be so cruel, that they would have mercy on the person's soul.
Sakura turned towards the waterfall. It was strange, it seemed, almost like as if it had been untouched throughout the entire slaughter. She slowly turned and walked towards the sparkling blue pool, almost like as if she was in a trance. Something was beckoning her to go there. All her instincts were screaming at her to investigate, since something was abnormal, weird.
Sasuke hissed when he looked down at the ground. So much blood. His eyes dancing with both enjoyment and guilt. After surviving a few years with the sound, he developed a strong sense of bloodlust. He loved to kill, whether innocent or guilty. His hands were drenched in their blood. And yet, there were times where it felt wrong, where he felt almost a sense of remorse and self-disgust. But he'd pushed it away. His conscience was only a hindrance. It made no difference in his life. Sasuke bowed his head and sighed. There were some things that he just couldn't forget. Like the honor that had been branded into his soul. The honor that forbade him to harm an innocent. Things have changed. He was a hunter. A creature that thrived in the dark.
Craving others, enjoying the cries of pain. He was what he was, and nothing, and no one could change that. Sasuke stared straight ahead with blank, troubled eyes. It was ironic, the fact that he hated his brother, for destroying his life, his family, and yet, he was inflicting the same pain upon others. A bitter smile touched his lips. Oh, there were many that wanted nothing more than to see him wither under them, to see him tortured for every cruel deed he's ever done.
And then there was Sakura. A naive girl that had once fallen head over heels for him. The one that had foolishly offered him her heart. Sakura was as delicate as a flower blossom. Bright and cheerful. Without a thought about anything in her life. Sasuke had never, ever seen a day where Sakura didn't have a smile on her face. And her eyes. Those dark emerald pools that had caught her attention. The eyes that were the windows to her soul. Sasuke tossed his head and searched the room for Sakura. He needed to protect her. Somehow. His eyes widened with shock when he realized that Sakura was straying away from the group. That she was going deep into the garden, alone. He cursed himself for feeling soft and ran after her, taking in the puzzled and mystified expression written on her face. Sakura was up to something, and it definitely wasn't good. His eyes widened when he saw that she'd stopped, right in front of the waterfall. Sasuke tilted his head in confusion. What was she doing? It wasn't the time to enjoy the scenery. Someone had just been murdered, for heaven's sake. She had to have some sense to know not to wander around.
Sakura reached out towards the water, and frowned, before reaching into the sparkling pool, a mirror of the pain and terror. She let out a scream of fear, when she felt something, someone underneath the water, someone, very, very dead. She instantly pulled her hand away, and saw blood, so much blood dripping from her fingertips. It wasn't just an innocent little waterfall pool, it was a grave, a cold, watery grave. To be continued, and thank you for watching.